not going to be are my students. Still great. Well, I mean, yes. All things considered.
Okay, I've turned the sound on. At least hopefully it's on. No one has said so far it's not. And you've got 15 people watching.
Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. What?
Well, that's a lot of
Totally. Well, one of them should be my daughter.
I really hope I published the Ternus for this.
I don't know. Oh, okay. It's okay. What? Where?
There's so much to keep track of right now. It's like a 10-minute process.
Oh, unfortunately. You got like a minute now, right? Or is that possible?
That clock, maybe they fixed it. It had been slow, but it's good.
I've got 7. You have 1 minute according to my computer.
Okay. Fantastic. You're okay. You have a minute. You can keep talking. It's okay. Keep talking. It's
Well,
okay.
now it's officially 7.
Hold on. And I didn't see it first. Okay. I was gonna get it just right and start counting. Someone said that was gonna be
You're
very
like, hey, you're gonna be back to school for something. Thank you. No. Okay, Alyssa, you ready?
Yep, we're good. We're, hold on, let me press record.
Okay.
But we are sounded. Where is it?
Yeah, please don't forget to
That's
record.
not my job. We're good. Okay. Hi, everybody. It is 7 o'clock, right? So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome to our 5th installment of Occupy Bulk. This, of course, is our teach-in series, right? We're very glad that you guys have all joined us. My name is Dana Ternus. I am a senior instructor in the Humanities and Social Sciences Department. And tonight, we are going to discuss blackface and cultural appropriation. Why? Well, Halloween is coming up, yes. And I assume that in spite of the pandemic, you are still putting together your Halloween costumes, correct? Everybody's like, no, I'm too old for that, right? Okay, well, if you are, great. And if you're not, fine. But these two practices often tend to crop up, right, around the Halloween season. So that is what we're going to talk about tonight. So I don't know if you know this, but just last year, 2019, a Pew Center study found that 1/3 of Americans believe it is still acceptable to wear blackface for Halloween in spite of its racist origins and the perpetuation of racial stereotypes. Okay? The breakdown of that study I thought was particularly interesting. So if you look at this, right, if you're looking at all adults, regardless of race, 34% said yes, it's okay. 39% of white folks, 18% of black folks, 28% of Hispanic folks. The political breakdown is markedly different. Yes? Republicans are 51% say yes, it is okay. Democrats are 21%. So we clearly don't agree on this, right? So tonight we're going to look at the origins of blackface and the practice of cultural appropriation, the relationship between those two practices, and then how they contribute to the ideas of white supremacy in the United States. All right? So let's start one disclaimer before we get started. I will tell you that when we get into some of those historical examples, there are going to be words that are offensive. It is important that we look at those words, that we know that they existed, yes? So please kind of keep that in mind as we go forward, all right? So what do you think? In what contexts have you seen white people use blackface? Go ahead.
Like old little musical, like old shows.
Yeah, so in entertainment, yes, for sure. What else? Nothing. You've never seen this before, really?
Halloween costume.
Halloween costumes. Thank you. Anything else?
I was gonna say there was an instance at my high school where someone dressed up as a black teacher and had blackface on.
Okay, there you go, right? So if we see it, right, and we recognize it, why do you think that there is so much confusion over the fact that blackface is a serious offensive practice? Why do you think that people don't understand this? You can guess.
Just something like for like a Halloween costume, I think it's like a non-offensive thing. They think it's supposed to be like in good humor and all that, but the reality of it is not.
Right, and so the thing is they see it as a joke, right? They don't take it seriously, right? Okay, so what are the typical consequences that we have seen when people are caught in blackface? Think public figures. What happens to them? Can you think of any examples? Go ahead. Nope, okay.
I can go.
Yes, go.
Like shamed, silenced, fired.
Yep.
Forced out of their job.
All of those things, right? So let's talk about a couple of examples. Megyn Kelly, yes, 2018, on the Today Show when they were discussing a reality TV star's choice to darken their skin to play Diana Ross, yeah? During that discussion, she said this, but what is racist? Because you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface on Halloween or a black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Back when I was a kid, that was okay, as long as you were dressing up as like a character. That's 2018. A couple days later, she apologized. Yes? And she said, the history of blackface in our culture is abhorrent. The words are too deep, or the wounds are too deep. Okay? Anybody know who Ralph Northam was? Yes? Who is he? Governor of Virginia, who also, right, had in his note that he's a Democrat. I'm going to point that out. I'm not trying to be political here, yes? Okay, so Governor Northam, of course, there's a picture from his medical school yearbook, right, that shows one person in blackface and one person dressed up as a KKK member. Initially, he says, oh, I'm really sorry. And then he backtracks and he's like, oh, that's not me. I did wear blackface, but not in this picture. Okay. How about fashion? Gucci. Did anybody pay attention to this?
Mm-hmm.
So Gucci, the fashion line, right, put out this sweater in 2019. And amid massive backlash, as you might imagine, pulled it off the line. Yes? Of course they did. So why does this matter? We're going to talk about these three things, right? Why does this matter? A lot of people will say, upon hearing negative feedback about instances of blackface or cultural appropriation, that it wasn't their intent to offend people. True? Or that they had the best of intentions. Well, the thing is, damage can be done, right, regardless of your intention. So, let's define what blackface is. Okay, so very simplistically, right? This is a term that is used to refer to the practice of wearing makeup to imitate the appearance of a black person. Yes? The use of such makeup, of course, was associated with minstrel shows in the United States from the 1830s until the mid-20th century. Does anybody know why people choose to use blackface? Let's talk about a couple of things. First and foremost, when you talk about blackface, it is a way to invoke the other without allowing or being the other, right? You have an inaccurate representation while preventing self-representation for black people, right? You are creating this perception. It can act as a mask, yes? It allows actors or artists to kind of mock the powerful without fear of retaliation, right? That you can question authority under a cover. But also consider that blackface is always two-faced, right? You can speak openly about corrupting power and authority, but at the same time, you are demeaning blacks by introducing and reinforcing racial stereotypes, okay? All right, so where does all of this start, okay? When we go back to the beginning, I read a ton of books for this. One of the books that I read is a book, well, it's kind of like the preeminent book, right? This is Dr. Eric Black, who writes a book called Love and Theft, Blackface, Minstrelsy in the American Working Class. And in this book, here's what he says. Blackface minstrelsy was an established 19th century theatrical practice, principally of the urban North, in which white men caricatured blacks for sport and profit. He says that they borrowed black cultural materials, but in this antebellum period, so before the Civil War, right? This is understood as a caricature. What does that mean? What is a caricature? Is it accurate or inaccurate? Inaccurate, right? Okay. So in the early years, this is understood that way, okay? That being said, it depended on slavery, okay? It depended on people pretending that slavery was natural, that it was amusing, and that it was right. Historian Dale Cockrell says, poor and working class whites who felt squeezed politically, economically, and socially from the top, but also from the bottom, invented minstrelsy as a way of expressing the oppression that marked being members of this majority, but outside of the white norm. In other words, right, he says they created it to make themselves feel better. All right? So when we look at antebellum blackface, we usually start here. So if you look at this, lovely, oh, am I not working? Oh, I am, okay. So if you look right here, right, the original blackface comes from this guy. This is Thomas Dartmouth Daddy Rice, and he creates in the 1830s a character called Jim Crow. Now usually when we talk about Jim Crow, we're talking about what? Right, you're talking about segregation and a legal system, right? Okay, that's not what this is. Thomas Rice was actually a New York native. He became a traveling actor in the 1820s. He actually grew up in an integrated northern neighborhood, and he said that he used his observations to create an exaggerated character named Jim Crow. He wore tattered clothing, and he used burnt cork and grease to make his face black. Okay? He wrote a song, it's called Jump Jim Crow, and he performed that with a dance that he claimed to have learned from a slave. So what do we talk about this? Well, here's the thing. He doesn't use the term minstrel. He doesn't use the term minstrel show, but he establishes and reinforces black stereotypes, right, which then feed into that practice. So in 1843, we see the first ensemble show. These folks in the middle here, maybe. There we go. These are the Virginia Minstrels. They are the first known minstrel show, but it's really Christie's Minstrels in 1844 going forward that established the structure of minstrel shows. So Christie's Minstrels were founded by Edwin P. and George Christie, and they established the standard structure. So here's kind of what the show looks like. Obviously, we don't have any film, right, of that, but in the first act, they would have a band that over here would stand in a semicircle, okay? And in the very middle would be like your announcer, right, your MC, the guy in charge, okay? He is a very formal speaker. He does not use slang or anything like that. On the outside, you see these three guys here on the other side, you have what are called the end men, or the jokers. You have one set of three who play the tambourine, and on the other side you have the bones who play castanets or spoons. All right? And they started the show with jokes and comedic play, a little bit of music, a little bit of dancing. The second act was always a variety show with song and dance. And the third act was always a one-act play, usually set on a plantation, right? Where they would do like some type of story, but then a walk around and a dance so you could meet them, right? Okay. Also consider that Christie's Minstrels got help from a guy named Stephen Foster. Does anybody know who he is? Who is Stephen Foster? He's known as the father of American music. He is the guy who wrote things like Oh, Susanna, Camptown Races, My Old Kentucky Home, Swanee River, all of those things. Okay? And so he writes those for the minstrel shows. Now, I should point out that Oh, Susanna, I don't know if you know this. You guys know Oh, Susanna, the song? Okay, so Oh, Susanna is kind of a nonsense song, but it was written as a way to make the lost love feel better as he is leaving. My Old Kentucky Home is all about the lament of an enslaved person who is being forcibly separated from their family and his painful longing to return to the cabin, to the plantation with his wife and kids. Okay? These shows in the antebellum period provided support for pro-slavery arguments. Consider, right? Especially things like George Fitzhugh's positive good theory, right? George Fitzhugh's positive good theory says slavery is a positive good, yes? That owners cared for their slaves from the cradle to the grave, right? That their living conditions are better than industrial workers in the North. That owners fed and clothed and housed them. That they supported the children, the injured, the disabled, people who would be considered non-elements in the North, right? How does this perpetuate that idea? Can anybody tell me? What are they showing you about the lives of slaves, especially things like those plantation plays? What types of things might they show you? Happy slaves? Yes, right? Comfortable slaves? Yes. People who like where they're at. Okay, so I just said this all perpetuated slavery, right? But here's the really weird part. I don't know if you know this, but these shows, again, remember this is largely a northern phenomenon, right? Were actually super popular with abolitionists. Okay, wait. I know, Dr. Bosch just went, what? Okay, so here's the thing. They were actually immensely popular with abolitionists who helped to popularize them. They were popular because abolitionists said, look, right? Look at how they're creating this myth, right? And they say this is genuine Black life. It shows how terrible it is, right? It really encouraged more pity than understanding. Abolitionists don't have to be supportive of equality, nor were they all the time, right? Just because you wanted an end to slavery does not mean that you did not support white supremacy. Okay, so we have this kind of like this antebellum, right, movement. And what we see is that during this time, as these shows develop, they develop what we call archetypes. So think like stereotypical characters that always show up, all right? So for example, every single minstrel show is going to have a character that we refer to as Sambo. Yes? They are the uneducated, rural, lazy slave. Okay? They're also going to have, maybe, there's this other character called Zip Coon, who is like this representation of urban black folks. Flashy dressed, right? Attempts to use sophisticated speech, but it was really a mockery. And it was a mockery of those who were trying to assimilate into urban culture. Think like places like New York, New Orleans, Philadelphia, okay? You, of course, have the mammy figure, right? Who is going to be asexual, female, but not really female, right? And she has a bunch of kids who are referred to as pickaninnies regularly. And then, of course, you have the antithesis of the mammy, and that's Hannah. She is typically a biracial woman who is supposed to be sexually desirable. Okay? So these archetypes are further developed over time. I should also point out something really interesting to me. In this period before the Civil War, a lot of the actors who portrayed characters in blackface were Irish immigrants or of Irish descent. Does anybody know why that is particularly weird?
Because of the close living relationship that they had working in the more like industrial areas.
Yes, but also, as we talked about in class earlier, what happens with the Irish and their whiteness in America?
Well, they get it and it goes, and they get it and it goes.
Right, so if we're thinking about those characters, again, consider this 1830 forward, right? So when we're talking about Irish immigrants and Irish folks, or like Irish descendants, these are the folks who come as a result of poverty, the Great Potato Famine, yes? Okay, and so in a lot of instances, the Irish are equated with black folks, yes? Okay, so why would Irish folks agree to do this? Why would that be a thing? Well, consider that this allows them, it gives them the opportunity to, in a lot of ways, assert their position as white, right, and to participate in white supremacy, okay? Now, I don't want you to think that everybody loved this. They don't. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass, right, decried blackface performers as, quote, the filthy scum of white society, who have stolen from us a complexion denied to them by nature in which to make money and pander to the corrupt taste of their white fellow citizens. So it's not like everybody loves them, but they are common, okay? Now, here's the thing. After the Civil War, things start to change a little bit, and that purpose starts to change, okay? Instead of being caricatured, what you're starting to see is the supposed authentic representation of blacks instead. So you're going to see lots of posters like this, right? Advertising for the minstrel jubilee. They're going to use a lot of symbolism in terms of like things like nostalgia for rural life, right? Over industrial cities. They're going to talk about a longing for the past. What past are they talking about?
Slavery.
Yeah, slavery, right? It suggested that the Civil War was wrong. Yes, that there was truth in the antebellum arguments for slavery, security and safety being the most important, right? That there were benefits to racial hierarchy. Okay, so some examples. This is where we're going to get into some of that like language issue. Okay, so fair warning. Let's talk about this one first. Okay, so in 1890, there is a theater and art company that is founded by two guys, Burt Williams, he's on the left, and George Walker, he's on the right. And they pegged themselves, they advertised themselves as the two real coons. Okay, why? Why did they do that? Well, here's the thing. These are two black actors who used blackface themselves. Okay? This was a billing that was meant to suggest that they had superior authenticity over white folks using blackface. Okay? It had the desired effect. It does get a lot of attention brought to them, right, in terms of their undeniable talents, and they put on a whole bunch of different productions. Sons of Ham is one, The Policy Players is another. Really, their goal was to make it to Broadway. But George Walker died in 1911. Interestingly enough, however, his partner, Burt Williams, becomes one of the most famous blackface actors of the 20th century. When ragtime emerged, we see, right, kind of this torrent of creativity, and there's this guy named Ernest Hogan. He was a really popular vaudeville actor, performer, who went on to be the first black producer on Broadway and performer. In 1896, he writes this tune called All Coons Look Alike to Me. He's black, right? This is actually a breakup song, believe it or not, but it set the stage for some truly abhorrent songs. In fact, ragtime has a whole subgenre called coon songs, okay? So it becomes this subgenre, and reportedly, Hogan, right, who writes this song, was horrified by what happened. On his deathbed, right, he said to the effect of, I regret using that slur because it allowed this misrepresentation of black folks. Okay. We can look at some examples. Burt Williams, who we just looked at, right? He goes on to be a really, really, really big silent film star, right? He uses blackface even though he is black. You also have people like Stephen Fetchit, who has all kinds of characters like Lazy Richard, throwback to which character?
Sam.
Yep, the Sambo character, correct. And Willie Best Sleeping, that's his name. So the historian Richard C. Toll says, you know, if you look at this, post-1900, minstrel shows did actually make it possible for the first large-scale entrance of black folks into show business. But, I mean, they're breaking barriers, yes. However, how do they break those barriers? By playing into those stereotypes, into those archetypes, right? So is that really positive? Arguably, probably not. Oh, okay. So here, let's look at Al Jolson. Al Jolson is probably the most famous blackface performer. I don't know if you know who he is. His most famous movie is The Jazz Singer, right? Which wins an Academy Award. Okay. So he was actually a Lithuanian Jew who was pretty liberal. And there were some people that argued that he was better than other blackface performers because he told people, right? As a Lithuanian Jewish guy, I identify with African Americans. He says, I use that mask, you know, to share the pain and the suffering and the vulnerability of minorities. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times when we look at those minstrelsy shows, they use a lot of slang, right? And a lot of, what do I want to say? Intonation, right? That would be associated with black folks. Al Jolson does not do that. Watch this. Sometimes heat and sometimes wet. I know where the sunshine gets. Granny, Granny, my heartstrings are tangled around. Well, Granny, I'm coming. Sorry, I need to wait. I'm coming. I hope it's right by, not too late. Granny, Granny, I walk a million miles on one of your smiles. Oh, sorry. Well, regardless. Okay, so here's the thing. Does he use a lot of slang in there? With the exception of like mammy, is there a whole lot of that? No. Is his intonation good? Does he use an accent? No. So why might people say he was better than the alternative? Okay, don't think I'm saying it's better. Right? It's still freaking blackface, yes? However, what makes this different than a minstrel show where they have lots of accents and slang? Absolutely, right? There's more a portrayal of people as people, right? Okay, so throughout the 20th century, we see tons of this. This is gonna be a little offensive, so I'm just gonna put it out there, right? However, this comes from the Jim Crow Museum, and it is like a compilation of blackface images, right, and skits. So take a watch of this, and then we'll talk about it.
Handy number ready. Lights.
Money stands for that. Just please. When we bless, we all invest in the USA. Sammy, my Uncle Sammy. Lou Doctor would come out on stage and Lou would have a smudge of black on him right up there. Yeah, George Primrose had one right down here. That's right. Now, gosh, there were a host of others. Names and stars like Honey Boy Evans and Bert Williams and Eddie Leonard and Al Took. Oh, man, you're talking about the top man.
Oh, I've seen in my time some very funny folks, but the funniest of all I know is the colored individual as short and you're alive and blank as any blank roll. You may talk until you time, but you'll never get a word from this very funny queer old coon. He's an knock-kneed, double-jointed, hunky-punky hope, but he's happy when he whistles his cue.
And while we're at it, don't you forget those old Edmonds there. Oh, those topical Edmonds. I want you to know that I'm ready for the ride. No, stupid.
Oh, for a month and a half, I've been dreaming how pretty I was going to look tonight. Well, here's my punishment for thinking so well of myself.
Oh, he's got a pair of lips like a pound of liver split and a nose like an India rubber shoe. He's a limpy, happy, chuckle-headed huckleberry dick, and he whistles like a happy silly Lou. He's an independent, free and easy, fat and greasy hand with a cranium like a big baboon. Oh, I never heard him talk to anybody in my life, but he's happy when he whistles his cue.
How would you like to go to work for me?
Yeah, ma'am, how much you gonna pay me, I hope?
Well, let's see now. I'll pay you all your work.
No, ma'am, I gotta have some money.
Say, I have an idea. Yes. You'll be around here about a half hour before the show. You mean you will in and watch your crew? Jim Crow, you'll practically be right on the stage. Woo! Wheel about, turn about, wheel about, and turn about, and do just so. Every time I wheel about and jump, Jim Crow. Give me back my clothes, please.
USA's United Bank.
Yes!
One whose name was Nancy Hank.
Tell me.
Abraham.
What do you do for a living? What do you do for a living?
What I do for it,
That's what they.
I'll do as little as possible.
Now, all I want you to do is meet me at the zoo in the morning at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, with the rest of the monkey.
With the rest of the money.
Yeah, I'll bring my grandpa with me.
It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere. It's in TV and it's in movies and hello, maybe, or not. Okay. It's in children's cartoons. How many of you went, oh my God, that's Bugs Bunny, right? When I was watching this at home, my daughter's like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah, I know. You know, it's everywhere, right? It was common. But I also don't want you to think that it was just in entertainment. It's not, right? This is not just entertainment where blackface is used. This is also used in common society. The University of Virginia, for example, used minstrel shows as fundraisers for building projects, most notably to build their chapel. The KKK used blackface to confuse its victims during an attack. The United Daughters of the Confederacy, some of you from race and ethnicity might recognize that name. They used blackface comedy shows as a recruitment tool. Okay, perhaps the biggest single organization behind the spread of blackface was founded in 1868, and it's called the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks, or the Elks Club. They were actually originally, like as a society, known as the Jolly Corks, and it commonly referred to, and were commonly referred to as the Burnt Cork Brotherhood, in homage to their minstrel founders. In the 20th century, I don't know if you know this, they became a segregated, all-male, anti-communist business and political network that were reliant on blackface fundraisers to help fund and finance thousands of lodges across the country. And those hubs, right, served as political organizers, patriotic social events, civic education. They're involved in all of that. Even as late as 1970, they refused to integrate and they voted to remain racially exclusive. Some really famous examples of elks. Anybody know any? Does anybody recognize this guy right here? Historians, I'm picking on you. This is Al Smith. Okay. Other famous members: President Harding, FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, JFK, Barry Goldwater, Earl Warren. You don't know who Earl Warren was? Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board. Okay, so it's everywhere, right? It's even here on campus. November 26, 1916. This is the minstrel show at Northwest. The Philo minstrels show up. And it says, I don't know if you can read that, so I'll read it to you. Costumes ranged all the way from the Dude Coon to the field hand, and from the turban of the Negro mammy to the headdress of the African bushman. This is in the Northwest Missourian. November 3rd, 1933. The WAA has a Halloween party with a costume contest. First place goes to a gypsy. Funniest costume is what? Can you find it? Negro mammy. This is 1964. This is a picture from a minstrel show performed on campus in 1964. Also, don't think that this is a thing in the past, right? 2012, Billy Crystal portrays Sammy Davis Jr. in blackface at the Academy Awards. Yes? Julianne Hough, 2013, she dresses up as Crazy Eyes, right? From Orange is the New Black, Uzo Aduba. 2014, Sullivan, Missouri. A Powder Puff football team plays a game in blackface. 2019, an FFA club in Lebanon, Oregon dresses in blackface for a Halloween party. It's also not uniquely a US problem. I don't know if you know this, right? But every year, many Dutch citizens dress in colonial style costumes, paint their lips red, wear curly afro wigs, and don blackface to become the minstrel-like character, Zwarte Piet or Black Pete. Okay, he is supposed to help Santa Claus, which is who? Santa Claus, indeed, right? Spread holiday cheer around the country. So traditionalists say Black Pete is just part of an innocent children's holiday, which also includes singing songs and reading poetry and gifts and spending time together, that sort of thing. Some even go so far as to say he's only black because he's covered in soot from coming down the chimney. Okay? Traditionalists say there is no connection with slavery. However, those against the tradition quickly point out that the character comes from a 19th century children's book entitled Saint Nicholas and His Servant. Okay? In which the servant, Black Pete, is described as a Spanish Moor, a black Moor, right, from Spain. Okay, so he might be a part of Dutch folklore, but his portrayal is part of the historically negative stereotypes of Black people dating back to colonialism. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, yes? apologized in 2019 for wearing blackface on at least 3 occasions in the 1990s and early 2000s. When he apologized, he said it was unacceptable and a terrible mistake. Okay. So now we know what blackface is. Let's talk about cultural appropriation. This one is a little bit harder, okay? Very simplistic definition. The unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society. Okay, does that help you? Because it doesn't help me. Right? So let's talk about this in an anthropological sense and then in a justice sense. All right? So cultural appropriation in the anthropological sense is taking intellectual property, cultural expressions, artifacts, history, and ways of knowledge from a culture that is not one's own. Is that automatically bad? Not necessarily. Cultural appropriation in the justice sense, however, is concerned with the difference between respectful and disrespectful taking. Cultural appropriation typically involves members of a dominant group exploiting the culture of a less privileged group, often with little or no understanding of the history and traditions of that non-dominant group. Okay? So in 2006, a professor at Northern Arizona University named R.A. Rogers wrote an article. And he wrote an article talking about cultural appropriation, and he identified 4 different types, okay? First, he talks about cultural exchange, where you have a reciprocal exchange where both sides are giving and taking, okay? So it's equivalent, does that make sense? Okay, then you have cultural domination, which is imposing the dominant culture on a subordinate culture. Can you think of any examples of that right off the top of your head? I'm seeing nods, yes, examples.
Indian boarding schools.
Indian boarding schools are a classic example of that, you bet, okay? Then there's cultural exploitation, the taking of subordinate culture for the benefit of dominant culture. This is really the one that most people think about when they talk about cultural appropriation. So we're going to talk about that here in a minute, all right? And then there's transculturation, where you look at the development of cultural hybrids, all right? So basically what he argues is there's these different types of appropriation, and it's not necessarily appropriate to say that appropriation is always wrong, okay? If there's some equivalency there, it's a little bit different. But he says if you're stealing things, if you're plagiarizing things, that's a different ballgame. So what we want to focus on is cultural exploitation, okay? So cultural exploitation is the appropriation of elements of a subordinated culture by a dominant culture without reciprocity, without giving back, without permission, without compensation, without understanding, and without appreciation. It is usually based on a history of discrimination or marginalization, exclusion, okay? Now, sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional, but regardless of the intention, it perpetuates the subordinate position of the subordinate culture. All right, so in American society, what does that mean? Well, basically it means that something is not good or acceptable until it is acceptable for white people. Okay? When a dominant culture, for example, wears articles of an oppressed culture as a fashion accessory, it marginalizes the struggles that some face for being different, while those who are white, when they adopt that culture, are praised for their kitschy fashion sense. Yeah? Here's an example. In 2018, Kim Kardashian posts a picture of herself in quote-unquote Bo Derek braids. This is a great example of cultural appropriation, right? And exploitation. So if you don't know what Bo Derek is, in the late 1970s, right, she stars in a movie called 10, and she has all the braids, all right? Okay, but still, Bo Derek braids, really? You do not have to be a historian to know, right, that small braids have been used by women of color, in, particularly of African descent, for centuries. Yes? Okay, in case you don't know, right, a lot of people refer to them as cornrows. They do have an official name. I don't know if anybody knows that. They're called Fulani braids. Okay, and they actually come from a bunch of different tribes, but most notably in Ethiopia, right? So there's the Wo Diaby tribe. That's one of the women, one of the women's groups who started this. And then there are the some tribes in southern Ethiopia who wear what are called Sharuba styles, so like small braids, right? We typically refer to them as cornrows. Yeah. Okay, so Kim Kardashian in 2018 says, I'm wearing Bo Derek braids. Why is this exploitation?
She named it after someone that stole it from someone.
Arguably, yes, right? The argument here is that styles that are worn for decades, centuries, even millennia by Black women are not deemed beautiful until a white person wears them, right? You have to consider Black men and women have been sent home from school, have been denied competition, have been prevented or refused employment, right, because of hairstyles. In 2017, 2 twin sisters were given detention in a New York City public school for wearing cornrows. In 2018, a 6-year-old boy was sent home from school because of his dreadlocks. And a week later, an 11-year-old girl at a private Catholic school was asked to leave school because her hair extensions violated the school policy. Now you're going to ask me, what's the policy, right? Her school policy stated, only the student's natural hair is permitted. Extensions, wigs, hair pieces of any kind are not allowed. Andrew Johnson, who was a Black high school wrestler, was forced to cut off his dreadlocks before a match, right, in 2019. Rules and restrictions for acceptable hairstyles often target people of color, but exceptions are made for those who are white. This is cultural exploitation. Okay, you ready to get mad at me? Everybody ready? Let's look at some other examples. Okay, so individuals, right, within a culture differ on whether things are culturally appropriated or not, right? All Native Americans do not see the tomahawk chop as being appropriation. Some do, some don't. Okay, so let's talk about these. I Dream of Jeannie in the 1960s. Where is the cultural appropriation here? Where are they stealing from?
India.
Possibly India, but more likely,
Middle East.
yeah, the Middle East, right? Arab countries, right? And culture, you bet. Okay. I'm not old enough to remember this. I don't know if anybody is, but Cher's half-breed in 1973. Denise is like, okay, so here's the thing. The song itself is really not that terrible, but it's the costume, right, that she wears when she sings it. Can you see how this is cultural appropriation? Yes or no? Okay. The Washington Redskins, which are no longer the Washington Redskins, yes? Now they are the football team.
Washington football team.
Okay, that, sure. Okay, so here's the thing. It depends on who you ask, right? But I would point out that Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, Colorado senator, right, was at a symposium at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and they were talking about native mascots for sports, and he said this, how would you like for us to change the name of that team to the Washington Darkies? He pulled no punches. Does he think it's cultural appropriation? For sure, yes. Okay, let's talk about the tomahawk chop. Am I gonna tick some people off? Probably, that's okay. Here's the thing, people have different opinions, right? Eric Anderson, does anybody know who he is? He's a professor of Indigenous Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University. He said, the tomahawk historically is a weapon, and he suspects that the chop is like a nod to battle in Indigenous societies, and now he's like, yeah, it does kind of create a distorted view, but it's not horrible. However, Ryan Helsey, if you don't know who he is, he's a relief pitcher for the Cardinals, right, and a member of the Cherokee Nation. He told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch the tomahawk chop is, quote, a misrepresentation of Native Americans and that it depicts them in this kind of caveman type people way who aren't intellectual. Okay.
Because
that dude also in brown face?
Which one?
The one with
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you're gonna say
Little war
sheriff's
paint.
costume is problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, equally problematic. Yes, I would agree.
And I would say that the Kansas City Chiefs is cultural appropriation. The Washington Redskins, that's not
Is
appropriation,
racist.
that's a racist
Yeah.
slur.
I would agree.
I'll
Also,
fight you on that.
so here's the thing. I won't pick on Florida State. Does anybody know why? They have permission. That's right. Right? They purchased permission and continue to pay for permission from the Seminole tribe. It's a little bit different.
Some of the Seminoles.
Well, yes. Okay, fair. But I'm just saying. Compare, right? It happens in Northwest too. This is the Horseman Thanksgiving play on your left. The caption reads, "The Young Savages." Awesome. I don't know about y'all, we did this when I was little. We totally dressed up as Indians, right? In our little school place for Thanksgiving. This is the fraternity frolic. This was an inaugural event. These are the Valley Gent. They are supposed to be, right, from Bali. It happens everywhere. Okay, so how do these two things relate to each other? Please note the dates, 1950, 1962. All right, so how do these two fit together? Is blackface cultural appropriation? Well, no, right, and yes. They have like this unique relationship to each other, all right? So in terms of blackface, do you always know when someone is wearing blackface? For sure, yes, right? Is it evident to you? Yes, right? Was blackface acceptable for a long time? Yes. Is it considered racist today? Sure, right? Blackface is associated with the early theater traditions in the US, right? Okay, so that's blackface. Cultural appropriation is a little bit different. There's some confusion or disagreement, at least, about whether something is cultural appropriation or not, right? Cultural appropriation still happens today, yes, and it's not always called out for being racist, right, or offensive. Cultural appropriation is not just in theater, right? It is in music and art and fashion and more, but both can be offensive, right, to underrepresented groups, and both have deep historical roots in the US, and both continue to this day. Okay, so here's the thing that I always wonder about, right? Blackface, particularly, was once central to American popular culture. Yes, minstrelsy and blackface became taboo after African American activists fought against it in the 60s and 70s. Does anybody know why schools do not do blackface or those other types of questionable practices in schools anymore? Because moms got mad. Black mothers, right, after integration took place, ran a national media campaign, and they filed legal cases to prevent schools from doing blackface performance, dress up, and they also removed textbooks that had it in there, right? So here's the thing, ironically, they worked really hard to get rid of this, and they were determined to envision this better world, but they were so successful at driving this out, right, driving this practice out, that high schools, elementary schools, whatever, rarely ever talk about this anymore, right? It just doesn't happen. And that's really the reason why so many Americans don't understand why this is a big deal. We stopped teaching people. It also might suggest why we now see Halloween parties, right? With, like blackface hip hop themes, yeah? Because we don't talk about it. The truth is, it's hard to look anywhere and not see it, right? Historically, white people have used blackface to portray African Americans in demeaning ways, right? Historically, cultural appropriation can be seen in advertising, costumes, fashion, hairstyles, take your pick. How do we change that? Well, in the case of blackface, easy, don't, right? Just don't do it. Yes? It's never okay. Never okay for a white person to wear blackface or pretend they're black. Blackface is always inappropriate and it is always offensive. It perpetuates stereotypes, yes, and it supports white supremacist ideas. In the case of cultural appropriation, you should always listen, right? you should always default to listening and thinking about respect. Yeah? So ask yourself questions like, does what I am wearing or doing perpetuate a negative stereotype? Do I understand the history and culture behind what I am portraying? Right? Am I using cultural symbols inappropriately? Is this degrading in any way? I always like to show this. We are a culture, not a costume, right? Am I using cultural representation solely for my own consumption or for the entertainment of others? Am I going to offend a particular racial or cultural group? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, just don't do it. Thank you. Question? Anyone? Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not trying to be disrespectful.
Nope.
But I'm still a little confused on how it's considered, I guess, like, the cultural exploitation
Sure.
to, like, for a white person to wear, to style their hair. Like,
Okay, so here's the difference, right? The author of that study, right, Professor Roberts, he doesn't say that white folks can't wear cornrows. What he says is when you attribute it to another white person, if you attribute it incorrectly, that is not okay. That's exploitation. Does that make sense?
so how in that example were they attributing?
Because Kim Kardashian said she was wearing Bo Derek braids. She attributed it to another white person. She did not attribute it back to the original source. Does that make sense? Okay. Dr. Miles, go ahead.
So, how do you separate really cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? And here's the example I'll use. The rapper Eminem, when he raps, is he culturally appropriating or is he showing cultural appreciation?
So my answer is I don't know. Because well, here's the thing, that in large part is in the eye of the beholder, right? It's how you perceive it. So if you want to, I'll send you that study from Dr. Roberts, but if I go backwards, I hope. Where am I trying to go? Here, cool. So he actually argues for what's called transculturation, where you got people from different ethnic groups, racial groups, right, who kind of work together to create a hybrid. My guess, and it's just my guess, is that he would see Eminem as transculturation, where there's kind of like an equal reciprocity. Does that make sense? I honestly can't answer that because I don't know. It depends on how you look at it. But I think that's how he would see it. Okay, or maybe cultural exchange. Again, reciprocity. Other questions?
I think an example of that too is like the Seminole University.
Yeah.
Florida, right?
No, Florida State.
Florida State, yeah. Where you've got some of the Seminole that is signed on, but other branches of the Seminole that find the university uses that problematic. So some even within the Seminole see that as kind of appreciation, and some see it as appropriation.
Yeah.
So, to that point, would Elvis Presley be appropriated or would that be appreciated?
Appropriating.
So I know we're gonna keep going.
No, you're fine.
It's hard for me to buy.
It is.
It's hard for me personally to buy because the Eminem is doing some appropriating.
And he calls it out too in several of his songs. He says that he's the first white guy to tell us Presley making so well that he's seen black music.
True.
Well, Elvis Presley also like didn't credit any of the black artists he stole music from. Oh, he straight up just stole it.
He credited Carl Perkins. Okay.
You don't have a lot of unusual respect though, because you realize Snoop, Dr. Dre, all like the high-end like Godfather rap talk about like how Eminem has like joined their culture as well. And like not fully joined, but like does a good job of like representing culture.
Good question, right?
Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just need to go back to that whole fair in 1973 because it was like.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
And being a young preteen. So what would you call that? Because when I, as a young preteen, heard that song and Cher being on the stage at that time, being her, it was about her owning a part of who she was that was told to be put to the back burner, right? In going out into Hollywood and going out into the music. She was not supposed to allow that part of her, right, to be seen out there in public. And it was one of hers that she came out and she was. So I always felt when I saw that and I listened to that song that was somebody saying, "You don't get to tell me who I am.
So
I will own who I am."
a couple of things about that. Based on what I read, Cher is not an official member of the Cherokee tribe, right? And there's not a whole lot of evidence to suggest that that is true. Now at the time, of course, nobody knew that. And again, the song itself wasn't so problematic, right? It was more the costume that she chose to wear. Does that make sense?
She's also not the Cherokee.
Right, that's what I said. She's not a
Cherokee.
member of the tribe, right, in any way, shape, or form.
Right, but like the images she's appropriating are not Cherokee.
No, no, they're not.
So
They're kind of generic.
there was this little part, like way back then. There
Yep.
was part of me that because American Indians were told not to like do not let anybody see any of your costume. Like they were held down as for all of that. So I guess in that preteen of who I was,
Sure.
in 1973, I saw that as something of somebody
That was
stepping
positive.
out and saying, you don't get to hold another culture down and who they are. Maybe not on all the same means that she came out with, but that was some of what it came out with, at least in some of that era.
No, I understand, and understand that the thinking on that has changed dramatically. Yes, since the 70s. Well, actually, since like 5 years ago, but that's fine too. So I don't know. I think we're evolving, like collectively as a society, right? And so things that were okay then, or that we thought were okay then, are maybe not so appropriate.
So we have to always think about when things are put out.
Yeah.
We have to think about the era and the era of time and the political environment of which things are being put out in. There's always context to them.
Yep. Very, very much so.
And it's interesting to note that Cher is the same song now.
Yeah.
So.
Brittany?
This is bringing me back to class.
Yep.
It's also interesting to think about like the colors of the past, like
Mhm.
that, like dehumanization.
Yes, ma'am.
Especially around that. It's interesting to see how it's like changing.
Yep.
But it's still the content is there.
Yes, I agree.
Especially with the like, and even with the transformation from the blackface plays going from being like extreme and exaggerated to being more they were supposed to be realistic
Right.
but weren't. It's like that changed. It's just interesting to see.
I agree.
I have another comment from online.
Okay.
See from Abigail. So to note that in addition to this conversation, that blackface and redface have also been used in Hollywood to avoid hiring African Americans and Native Americans. And I'm going to add on to that whitewashing of Asian characters.
For sure, yes.
So actively keeping minorities making the money they could be making.
Yes, ma'am.
So like, especially on like social media and stuff, you'll see a lot of like women like deeply alter the color of their skin.
Yep.
Like, to the point where they actually look black. Is that black?
Argue? I don't know. I don't know if I want to wade into that this evening. I mean, I for sure have a personal opinion, but historically, I don't know. So I'm gonna cover my own ground. targeting the Black community, but I do know that she was targeting particularly the poor community, right? Because they had women who died in childbirth so often. So I don't know that I've ever heard that.
She was also actively trying to get money from white eugenicists because they
Right, which is a
support
whole
things. So,
different, yeah.
which ties into it. We can talk about this in a few weeks too.
So there you go, come back on, what date is that?
The 19th.
It's
It's off
19th.
topic slightly, but that'll
But
be
that's okay.
not the medicine one.
Science and medicine and eugenics, not my thing, but Dr. Naramore will talk about stuff related to that on the 19th. Anybody else?
I got one.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I want to get it on the record.
Oh, okay.
Savannah High School.
Yep.
See, everybody else nodded. So we're all.
I purposely didn't put it up there, dang you, go ahead.
Well, I know that they're debating it right now.
Yep.
If you follow the Facebook comments, it's getting pretty
Heated?
vicious.
Yep.
And I'm like, in what universe is savage not a problem?
I don't know, not this one
Send
apparently.
it to me.
I know. And they've been debating for years. Years.
If you'd like to see all the viewpoints, I can share a video, because I spoke at their school board meeting. And it was a joy to participate in. And that's all recorded. And so if you would like to listen to 2 hours.
Oh, I watched it
of
live.
Comments about that. Yeah.
Stancy sent me the link.
Or if anyone else wants to see that, just hit me up.
Just holler.
I was so shocked to see the stuff from Holiday Inn.
Yep.
I have seen that movie a number of times.
And you didn't notice it, did you?
No, because it's not there at all. And so I don't know how I feel about that, because yes, I like that it's not there, but at the same time, as you said, then we're completely unaware of these things happening, or some of these actors who engaged in this.
Yep.
And so then it's just this like forgotten moment. And so there's like someone on the Facebook page is like, why are we still having this conversation in 2020? And it's like, why do we need to?
I know.
But it's because this stuff has been so excised.
Well, and that was kind of the point at the end, right? Is that yes, we did such a good job of eradicating it in schools that everybody's like, oh, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, or you can even look for things that allude to it. 'Cause
Yeah.
The Holiday Inn made me think of like Christmas, where they celebrate minstrelsy, but at that point they do very purposely do not actually have blackface, but you're still supposed to know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
As a kid, I did not know what they were talking about.
The same with the Disney Song of the South, which
Yep.
you can't even buy the movie anymore.
No.
And they're repurposing the ride that
Yes.
Star Mountain was based on Song of the South, and now that.
Yep,
that's true.
So at least there's something counting going on.
Some, yeah.
But that's why I think it's interesting with the discussion about Gone with the Wind, is have like this like discussion at the start of it. So if you're gonna watch it, here's like 10 minutes of us talking about things.
Yeah.
So you're not watching it and thinking like, oh, this is okay.
Well, it is
But
back to
you're
that issue
thinking
of
about
context,
it.
right? If you don't have the context,
it's
not gonna hit you in the right place.
Dana, that's my question. So how do we as a society continue to take steps forward, understanding that the knowledge we have today wasn't necessarily the forethought knowledge that we had in the era of time that some of these things were going on.
Sure.
So we learn from our past, and we learn more as people speak up. And should we have maybe done more in tune with other people? Unfortunately, that was not our society.
So
But
I
how
don't know,
do we move forward and
Right.
not continuously pull us back?
So one of the things that I tell my race and ethnicity class, well, not all the time, but I've said it on multiple occasions, is that recognition is not blame, right? The whole purpose of this is to recognize what we did in the past so that we don't continue to do it in the future, that we learn from it, right? And so I think that is important, that we have to educate ourselves or be educated in school, right? Like, let's talk about those things openly and honestly and recognize, yes, here's what we did, this is wrong, so let's not do it anymore. You know, I very fundamentally at my core believe that recognition leads to learning and change. How we do that, I think, is different for different people, but I think things like this the importance of history education, if I can just pull this for a minute, right, are significant. And so we have to make sure that we have enough funding, enough teachers, students who are involved and active. We have to have all of those things in order to make that really change. Okay, it's past time and I gotta go watch a presidential debate. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.
I was
I gotta go watch it. There is a meeting tonight, damn it, like, I am there.
Trump's about to match his time.